Hi everybody. Thanks for taking the time to come and watch this video. I'm here with my very good friend, Dr. Lorien Pratt, who's been an amazing friend to Rainbird. Lorien, it's nice to see you. Could you perhaps just start by introducing yourself and maybe share a few words on your personal journey in this massive field of AI?
Sure. So I've had a really interesting career because I've been on the technical side as well as on the business side. I have 3 computer science degrees, so I was very much a machine learning nerd. I'm known for inventing transfer learning, which is really exciting how important transfer is starting to become lately. But then I swung over and became a market analyst, and I was shocked to learn that people were not using AI in so many organizations, that it was really used only by sort of digital native companies and not used in manufacturing, insurance, healthcare, really at all, AI or analytics. And so I invented decision intelligence around 2009, and I do consulting and write books in that area.
That's fantastic. Okay, so we have this category of decision intelligence.
Right.
That's something that, as you say, you're credited with pioneering, and you've written a couple of books. I'm going to wave one at the camera because this is the one that I end up giving lots of copies away. The Decision Intelligence Handbook by O'Reilly. You and I have chatted before that, AI started out as a kind of a solution looking for business problems. Can you sort of maybe elaborate on what DI really is to you, and why that changes how people should look at this whole space?
Yeah, it's interesting. AI has been very much situated within academics for half a century now, coming out of data scientists and computer science. And as a rule, it's really has been disconnected from people who might use that technology. In fact, if you're doing something that's applied or you're focusing on the user interface, you're much less likely to get published or recognized within the AI community over the last few decades. And that's just been radically changing over the last year or so. We see that there's a huge demand for AI systems that actually work and that drive business outcomes. And so we're seeing a big shift in that direction. Did that answer your question, James, or was there something else that I could address?
No, that's really good. Maybe we could sort of define some of the terms here, because obviously we talk about
Sure.
machine learning, we talk about neural networks, we talk about symbolic AI, which is obviously seeing a bit of a resurgence, sub-symbolic AI. Could you maybe just give us a little bit of the history and how the pendulum swung from one to the other, and just to frame that history for people?
Sure. In the 60s, AI was about neural networks, but something called the perceptron, which was a model of a neuron, had some fundamental limitations. So there was all this hype in the 60s, believe it or not, about AI, got overhyped, led to a winter. In the 80s, AI got exciting again. And in that case, it was symbolic AI. And here was the idea that all of human knowledge could be captured in words, and more specifically structured words in the form of logic. I'm knocking my microphone here. And so the idea was, if we extract humans' verbal explanations of their domains of expertise and encode that in a structured way, that was what AI was. That's how we could get computers to be intelligent. And that's called symbolic AI. That got overhyped again. And then we had another winter that kind of ended, I don't know, you can argue, was it 99, 2000, maybe a little bit later. And now we've had this big upswing of data-centric AI, where the idea is not about symbolic or words or logic. The idea is about taking data, because so many organizations were generating petabytes or terabytes of data, and saying, well, maybe there's some use we can make of that data. Maybe we can make intelligent computers out of analyzing these data sets. And so for the last 20 years, sub-symbolic AI, which has been primarily neural network AI, the basic idea has been to take some data set and to use that to automatically create software. Instead of writing, we say in the paper, instead of writing Python or JavaScript, to build a piece of software, you use data to show examples of the desired input and output, and the software gets automatically created. And of course, this new sub-symbolic or neural AI has had some massively important benefits to companies like Google, self-driving cars. Machine vision is completely changed as a field, and a lot of machine learning work, up until just recently, has been of this sub-symbolic nature. So we've had these sort of winter, summer cycles, and the 80, first it was neural networks, then it was symbolic, and more recently it's this data-centric. sub-symbolic, but that's starting to hit some walls as the paper talks about.
Right. And actually, you've raised the paper. So we've co-written a paper together, haven't we, where we're looking at neurosymbolic AI. Maybe we'll come and talk about that maybe towards the end. Otherwise, we're going to throw so many terms at people, they'll be spinning. But that's really, really clear. So you say that this sort of era of data-centric AI, sub-symbolic, largely neural nets, is beginning to run into some challenges. And you talk about how this has worked for the sort of data native businesses, but maybe that's not necessarily worked for everybody. Could you just explain what that means and why organizations are now struggling? And I guess particularly in this new age that we've got, where everyone's talking about generative AI and large language models like GPT-4.
Yeah, sure. So what happened is this neural network data-centric AI was massively successful in areas in which there was a lot of data. And I think companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, what we call the digital native FANG companies, Microsoft is in there, really typified and dominated. I would say 90% of the AI value, I mean, I haven't measured this, but it seems this way to me, was generated by what you call these digital native companies. And what characterized them is large amounts of data, very simple decisions. People are like clicking on a thing or buying a thing or, you know, going to an ad. So really, really simple decisions, right, and a use case, a business case that could leverage that kind of technology. And what's really not well understood, and I love this paper because I think it's a watershed paper. It's really, really important for your readers, your listeners, to read this paper because it really puts a correct stake in the ground as to what AI is going to look like in the 21st century. And so what the paper talks about is how that's limited and how in particular there's this mindset that comes from these particular situations of the digital native companies that does not apply to other verticals like healthcare, finance, transportation, pick your favorite kind of non-originally digital company. There's a mistake that's getting made very, very broadly, which is people are taking the best practices that came out of the Googles of the world and the Facebooks of the world, where they're showing you the content that they think is going to, drive your interest. The best practices that were developed in the digital native companies do not apply to these other verticals. And so because we're misapplying it, and the paper talks about this, because we're making this misapplication, we're hitting all these AI failures. And I think there's a statistic in there that says 85% of organizations, 85% of machine learning projects are failing right now. And it's because of this sort of mismatch, right? That there's this, we're using what works in big, voluminous, automated data situations with simple decisions, and we're trying to use those in situations with complex decisions in which human knowledge is necessary and in which we don't necessarily always have voluminous data. And so this is a massive white space. I keep knocking my mic because I'm gesturing. It's a massive white space opportunity for companies like Rainbird to move into this place that has these different characteristics. And it's sort of melting the brains of the traditional data scientists because they were trained in this very other way. And so it's also a challenge to data scientists to learn that there's this big white space and that that's a huge amount of opportunity there.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a really helpful explanation. I mean, we see this all the time when we speak to data people who have made this massive investment in building all of these data lakes and trying to extract these insights. And there's this gap that exists, isn't there, between that insight and the ability to actually go and take action and actually get a positive business outcome out of that. I think when we've talked before, you even described, we've had this sort of data fetish for the last couple of decades. And it's amazing, isn't it, how the pendulum swings so comprehensively from one side to the other that history is almost forgotten. And so we'll come back to ChatGPT and LLMs in a minute, but yeah, I'm interested to know, we've both put a lot of effort into this paper and we've described this as kind of, this could be AI for the rest of this century, right? What excites you about this kind of rebirth of symbolic AI? You've said these winters and these summers, there was machine learning, and then it was symbolic, and then it went back to machine learning again. And now, Rainbird's been working in symbolic AI for a decade because we've been focused on trust and explainability. What excites you about this rebirth of symbolic AI and the role that this can now play in this decision intelligence approach, trying to solve this saturated mindset that everybody's had, that everything has to be data first.
Yeah. So isn't that interesting about those big investments in data? One of the things that excites me the most is that the paper breaks this mythology. It talks about how, there's many aspects of the wrong mindset that comes out of the digital native companies. One of them is, if you build it, they will come. If you don't worry about the decision you're supporting, you don't worry about the business use case, you don't think about the business outcomes or the actions, and you just build a big data lake with some good BI on top of it and maybe surface some insights and then throw them over the wall without really knowing how they're going to be used, that somehow that will drive business value. And that's just completely wrong. So that's the first part of it. Could you ask the next part of your question again?
Yeah, no, I mean,
I make sure I got to
it. No, I mean, you just on that. I mean, I was speaking to a big international bank recently who have made this pivot in their mindset towards decision intelligence and have said, unless a business problem starts with a clear view of the decision that you're trying to make, it's a waste of time. They said something like decision or insights without actually focusing on the decision is a distraction. And they're pivoting hundreds and hundreds of their data people to that methodology. If you want business intelligence or insights, you can do it yourself with the self-serve tools. We want to focus on the business outcomes. So, you've given us some fantastic definitions. You've helped us understand the history, kind of why this obsession has occurred, and we got a new mindset maybe that's beginning to emerge. Right. One of the things that is happening is regulations coming. We seem to have new AI bills that are popping up everywhere that are trying to focus on transparency and explainability and traceability, particularly when this comes to decisions of consequence. You mentioned the sort of digital native businesses maybe trying to get you to click on an advert or what movie you might want to watch next on a streaming platform. These are not decisions of consequence, are they? No one's going to die if they show you the wrong recommendation. When we're starting to think about using this technology to decide whether you have access to credit, to make healthcare decisions, to triage, to think about onboarding people into financial services, these are all regulated industries. How important do you think explainability and trust are? And do you agree that's what's kind of held this space back maybe for the last 20 years?
Yeah, and I think something more foundational has held things back. Well, two foundational things. One is, and this is a really key distinction, reading the paper, this distinction I'm about to tell you alone makes reading this paper worth it, which is it explains the difference between complex decisions and non-complex decisions.
Right.
And really briefly, a complex decision is one where you take an action and then that action plays out through reality to achieve some outcome, whether it's a business outcome or, reducing 30-day returns in a healthcare system or some other outcome. And that happens, that chain of events from the actions to outcomes happens within the context of also, complex things that could happen externally. And that kind of complex decision is not in them. Again, we're talking about the list of the mindset shifts from how we have been thinking about AI the last few years. It just doesn't include those kind of complex decisions. So now when we start to talk about regulatory, this gives us a new lens. So if you're asking old AI or AI of, 2022, it's just so ancient, right? If you're asking old AI, just last year, if you're asking that to give you an explanation of what it does, it's just going to have no clue, because there has not been a systematic study of these complex decisions that play out over time through a series of events that start with your actions and proceed through a causal structure to some outcome. It just hasn't been on the radar. And so, this is the second reason you have to read this paper, right? Is because once you understand this distinction about complex decisions versus the simple decisions that have been the home of AI for so long, now you start to have this ability to say, we can start to have some explanations, because an explanation, why did I take an action? Because it would lead to this, because it led to an outcome, right? So simply starting to reimagine decisions as actions that happen in a causal chain that leads to an outcome already gets us a big chunk towards explanations as opposed to the black boxes that we've had. And obviously in Europe, in the UK, regulatory issues are going to be increasingly drivers and constraints on vendors who provide solutions and on companies who buy their solutions. And so to me, Rainbird getting out ahead of that and having 10 years of experience in symbolic AI, modeling these kinds of complex decisions, you guys are sort of head and shoulders ahead of the rest of the market in being able to address complex decisions and the regulatory and explanatory requirements that they have. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. I had something else about, you asked for the mindset of the 21st century. I can say something else about that too.
Yeah, like. Great.
So this idea came into my head just as you were talking, that AI till now has been, let's have the houses we can build with nails, right? So we have this great tool. It's a nail and a hammer. What are all the houses we can build with a nail and a hammer? And that was like, the last wave of AI or 2 waves ago. And then the next is, we discovered the screwdriver. What are all the houses that we can build, with screwdrivers, right? And I'm not exaggerating. They are very solution up. Here's a cool tool. And, those of us who are nerds like me, we get pretty excited about tools, especially if they're digital. And we get so focused on the tool that we don't realize that to build a house, if we focused on the house, the problem that we're trying to solve, and then work back from the house, we would say, to build a house, we need a toolkit. We need the nails, we need the screwdrivers, we need the symbolic AI, we need the sub-symbolic AI, we need the ability to use data, we need the ability to use learning, we need inference, we need actions, we need outcomes. And so the 21st century is going to be defined by a toolkit approach. And a toolkit is only relevant, and you only see the need for a toolkit if you realize you're building a house, right? If you have in your head front and center the use case, in other words, the business outcome that you're trying to drive net profits in 1 year, in 2 years, some healthcare metrics, some insurance metrics. What is the thing that you're trying to build? And when you go from that perspective and work backwards to the toolbox, you realize, don't just need, this tool or that tool, but we need to take all of the tools, including the symbolic AI that Rainbird is so good at, that you guys have managed to monetize, unlike everybody else for a decade and a half, right? We need that in our toolbox because there's limitations to the sub-symbolic stuff that's happening right now. So in other words, the characterization of 21st century AI will be no longer looking for the solution under the lamppost, to mix metaphors, looking for your keys under the lamppost, because the keys are everywhere. And it will be starting with what's the problem and then working back to what tool you need to use. And that's going to need all of these tools. Oh, and by the way, non-AI stuff, econometrics, digital twins, simulation. Why are we leaving out randomized control trials? Why are we leaving these out of the picture? Well, 2,000 years of specialization in our fields has led us into these little silos, these bastions of expertise. Well, no longer. It's time to break those silos and integrate these solutions so that they actually solve not just business problems, big problems like climate and poverty and income inequality have the potential to be solved by this new approach. It's tremendously exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I guess that's where the language neurosymbolic starts to come. People are beginning to talk about hybrid AI or composite AI and neurosymbolic AI. But as you say, I was speaking to an analyst recently who have also said, we need an empathic approach to change, because this is all about making sure that we carry our workforces and our businesses with us on this next phase of AI-led transformation, isn't it? Because the one thing, and I mentioned it briefly earlier on, the one thing that OpenAI, which has been a nuclear bomb that's gone off in the middle of the business world with ChatGPT and GPT-4, the one thing it has done is kind of created this strange democratization effect. This is consciousness now that everybody has, because in our personal lives, our kids are coming and talking to us, and should I'm allowed to use this for my homework? And it's beginning to be discussed around dinner tables. So one of the things we've seen is that staff are demanding that the leaders of their organizations develop a very clear policy and narrative about what their AI strategy is going to be, because the cat is out of the bag, the genie is out of the bottle. It's being talked about. How do you think? AI was never one thing, was it? It was always a very broad church of technologies. I mean, machine learning is not even one thing. I think that's something that people that don't come from the science side of it, some people don't really appreciate that's true. We've always had a broad spectrum of little bits of technology, and we've had the AI effect that actually once something proves itself, it reveals actually that it was always just computerization. It gets its unique name and nobody recognizes it as AI anymore, which perhaps is why there's so much AI around us that we don't recognize, and why AI is almost everything that's still on the fringes of adding value. But what does neurosymbolic specifically mean to you as a term? And how does the combination of these two approaches, what do you think that specifically is going to do for our future?
Well, symbolic allows us to model those complex decisions. Symbolic says that we can talk to humans and we can interview them and we can build models of how the world works into our systems. Like with an insurance application, here's a business, it's been in business for 10 years, that makes it more reliable. And we can have, 100 other factors that help us make a decision that are way more complex than we could do with the old sub-symbolic AI. And so essentially sub-symbolic right now, it's like you take your data, which customers are going to churn, which customers are going to call us. It's not a path from actions to outcomes that leads to a business result, right? So in order to start to really inject AI into how people really need to make complex decisions, it has to sit between these actions and these outcomes. And that requires a symbolic AI approach, because sub-symbolic doesn't do that really. I mean, there's some research for causal inference, and that certainly has some potential, but it's not there yet in widespread application. And so what symbolic AI gets us is the ability to model complex decisions. What sub-symbolic gets us is the ability to learn and use data. And so that together is what we would call neurosymbolic AI, because sub-symbolic, neuro, data-centric AI, those are pretty synonymous. Sub-symbolic, neuro, data-centric AI. We tend to use those interchangeably, and the word that's come out for this new thing is neurosymbolic, which means it's this toolkit approach. We're not just using data, neuro or sub-symbolic or data-centric. We're not just using human knowledge, which was the 1980s and the only lamppost we looked under. We're combining these two things for the best of all worlds, and also, as you say, combining them with LLMs. I wanted to speak to that a little. I'm seeing this pattern where like shareholders are telling company leaders, oh, you must do AI. You must do the AI thing, right? And so leaders go, okay, I got to do the AI thing. And they hire an academic AI person who generally doesn't understand how to connect AI to business value. And so I call these kind of copycat AIs, and your company might be doing this, right? You might have an AI initiative out there, which is driven by all this LLM excitement,
right?
But you need neurosymbolic AI to ground that in reality so that you're not just copycatting. You need to do neurosymbolic AI to help you in a structured way to go from what business outcome are you trying to achieve? Don't start with the data. Don't build yet another data lake or anything like that. You need to start with the business outcome and work backwards to the AI tools that support that. And one of the most important things about neurosymbolic AI is it gives the opportunity to do that for complex decisions, especially in non-digital native companies, these overlay companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Where the data is nowhere near as rich and clean, and the problems it's being applied to are so much more complicated.
And that's the 21st century. I mean, that is what will define the next few decades. I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's just so tremendously exciting. And this paper is the best articulation of that vision by a mile that I have seen anybody write. It's really, if you're going to read one thing this year, don't even read my book. Read this paper first.
No, you got to read your book as well, because you've been an amazing influence in giving us clarity within this area. And I think, for us as well, Rainbird's differentiator is that we have a reasoning engine, right? We have some pedigree in that. It's driving reasoning and decisioning, and has been for pretty much a decade across a whole range of different verticals. And I've always quite surprised that there are not more of them out there. I mean, I know that this is what kind of excited you when we were first chatting about how we could, build this great collaboration together. I think when we think about the Achilles heel of symbolic AI, part of that was I think you'd agree, the closed world kind of nature of it. Symbolic AI is only ever going to know what you specifically in code. It's very narrow in its focus. And we look now at neural networks, and the Achilles heel of machine learning was always it's making predictions, not judgments. And there's this sort of trust gap and issues around explainability, particularly micro explainability, where we can know why this model has rejected somebody from borrowing money in one set of circumstances. I think what's interesting, particularly with the LLMs being kind of almost like the third point of the triangle, a piece of jigsaw, enables us to open the closed world limitations of symbolic AI by being able to address these models through a language model. So we can still reason symbolically, but we can talk to these models in natural language. And actually how we can leverage neural networks to improve these symbolic models and learn through data. So it's almost like we can have our cake and eat it for the first time in forever, because the sort of symbiosis, the complementarity between neural networks, symbolic AI, and obviously Rainbird's based on these extended knowledge graphs, so it's all very open and visible, and a very open sort of language that sits there, and LLMs as an ability to interpret and pass stuff around. I think for me, this is what excites me about the potential.
Yeah, I mean, let me speak to the closed world side of it in particular. And I really agree with you that LLMs get us past the closed world assumption. But what do we mean by that? What we mean is that when you're solving a particular problem, all you have is the experts that you can interview as you're solving that problem. You don't have some general purpose knowledge system that you can draw from. And you're absolutely right that LLMs have, scraped the world's knowledge
Right,
for good
absolutely.
or for better or for worse.
Yeah.
And so now we can combine our specialized expertise, and I'm building a few of these right now. Some specialized expertise can be combined with that general purpose expertise. And that's super powerful, but it's not just LLMs. And so LLMs can only go so far. They can't do the kind of reasoning that knowledge graphs do. And so if we look to the near future of where we're going within this new neurosymbolic world, and you guys are leading the charge here, it won't just be big general purpose knowledge bases embodied within large language models. It will also be big general purpose systems embodied in general purpose foundation inference graphs that can then be tailored and used by particular organizations. And, bottom line, what we're saying is if you're open world, you don't have to start from scratch every time.
Absolutely.
Right? You can leverage and reuse the experience of others. But I really wanted to emphasize, it's not just LLMs that have general purpose knowledge. There will be general purpose inference graphs. And we can say, there have been foundation models within the LLM world. We're going to see foundation inference models, and we're going to see foundation action to outcome models, right? And so that's another characteristic of how AI is going to change. Most AI projects are always in a closed world. It's like your data, right? Your knowledge, but you can't leverage data and knowledge that might come from other sources. And so that's going to characterize the next few years and ultimately the 21st century of neurosymbolic AI. And it's tremendously exciting.
It is exciting. And I've been involved in Rainbird since Ben Taylor and I co-founded this over a decade ago. And I don't think I've been more excited at any point in that 10 years, more excited than I am now. I mean, I think, Thank you so much for writing this paper with us. I mean, just maybe finally, I was just going to say, we ask some questions in this paper that we try and answer, don't we? How can we maximize the value from AI? How can we use this expertise to stay ahead of the competition? How do we get the ROI? Does this mean machine learning is not relevant? Of course it's still relevant. But understanding how this fits into the picture, how we can capture our own knowledge and not just extract knowledge from an LLM that we didn't design, and ultimately take that 85% failure rate into at least an 85% plus success rate. I mean, that's what we wrote this paper for, right?
Yep, absolutely. And the future of AI is not necessarily, and I hate to say this to data scientists who might be listening, not necessarily about designing new algorithms and getting them published. The future is about integrating the existing technologies, both with each other, but also more importantly, integrating them into the business use cases so that they actually drive value. And you take, as you say, those failure rates and turn them into success rates. And you flip it around. It's not data first. Don't start your AI project 2023 with the data. Please don't leave the data out of the room. I know that's radical. You're going to kill me, right? But start by being absolutely crisp about the business problem that you're solving, and then work backwards to these fantastic tools. I think this paper is a map, the best I've seen, head and shoulders, of the future of AI as it's going to play out over the next few years, and makes some of the most important key distinctions that haven't been written about elsewhere, like closed world versus open world, neurosymbolic, complex versus non-complex decisions, and grounds it in some really nice examples. So yeah, it's fantastic. Take a read.
Thank you, Lorien. Thank you for helping us with this paper. Thank you for adding your intellectual muscle to ours and enabling this to be real. And thanks ever so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure chatting with you as always.
Thank you as well, James. It's been great. And thanks to your listeners for making it till the end.